Welcome to episode 2 of the cinematic triple threat. 3 movies head into the ring. Only one will emerge victorious. This is the second episode. My name is Chris O'Mealy. I am your host, the founder of the CKCC Club Kayfabe creative community, of which you have more than likely found this wonderful podcast, or possibly via iTunes, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or of course Filling the Void, the podcast network gracious enough to host these shows, as well as many others on our network. Thank you, and shout out to Blake Riley for taking care of that for us. Joining me for this edition, a classic film triple threat, I have my co-host from Club Kayfabe WrestleTalk. You also know him as one of the co-moderators of the CKCC and our main Twitch streamer, Dan Peck.
Greetings and salutations.
And also joining me is my lovely wife, Shannon. Big fan of these movies.
I don't have any fun titles.
She's married to me, which probably is more of a fun title for
it's like a three-time guest on our movie shows.
I wish I had some really fun ones like, Mother of Dragons or...
You're the mother of cats.
I got that, I guess, but she's got better ones than I do. I just have misses. I guess
we have dragons. We have 2 little dragons. But we're not talking about dragons on this episode. That'll be in the future.
Wait, what movies did you watch? I saw dragons.
There were dragons in my version of The Wizard of Oz, just so you know. Yeah, what was I watching?
Imagine if they weren't flying monkeys and they were dragons.
They were actually dragons. So, these are 3 classic films. All of these were requested when I initially put out on Facebook. I asked people what their favorite movies were. Those were going to be focus points for the purpose of this podcast. All 3 of these got thrown into the mix. Gone with the Wind, which will be the first film we're going to talk about, was actually requested by my sister, Lauren Rhodes. So shout out to her. Wizard of Oz came as a suggestion from an old coworker of mine named Derek Kuklinski. Worked with me at the Disaster Ride at Universal. And Casablanca was requested by Bo Brown, who is another former coworker of mine, but from a different Universal park. He worked with me at the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. So I've got... that'll be coming in the future, I'm sure. We have those plans. So we've got 3 classic films here. Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, and Casablanca. Widely considered to be 3 of the greatest movies ever made.
Hands down.
So it's going to be a very interesting battle to pit them up against. Let's talk about Gone with the Wind first. Not only because I watched this first, but because it's the longest of the movies. Might also possibly be the longest movie we might review on this show. I'm not sure yet.
It's 20 minutes longer than Return of the King, so yeah.
Yeah, and those are slated for the future. There's not going to be a lot of negatives to say about these movies. Like, even though I love Star Wars, I did kind of rip those apart a little bit on the last episode. It's hard to find fault with classic films. And I want to focus on the positives, but if there's one negative about Gone with the Wind, I believe it could have been 2 movies. Easily 2 movies.
Definitely. I agree with that.
Yeah, it feels like the whole first half is just Act 1.
The entire first half is just
Act 1.
So, Shannon, you're a pretty big fan of Gone with the Wind. Give us a little rundown of what happens in this movie.
It's a Civil War era movie filled with Southern belles doing their best to dramatize every little thing.
That's an understatement.
I wish I could, just take a nap in the middle of the day while people fanned me. That would be totally okay in my book. I was born in the wrong era.
Yeah, you needed to be a Civil War Southern belle. This is the classic Scarlett O'Hara story.
Yes.
So basically, it's basically a ridiculous romantic triangle. Yeah. Pretty much.
The movie starts like the day the South votes on to go to war with the North.
Pretty much, yeah.
Or like a day before or something.
Yeah, the day before.
It's very, very close.
Because they're getting ready for a picnic, And at the end of the picnic, the men folk will go to a separate room and discuss whether to do the war.
Pretty much, yeah.
The men discuss politics while the women nap.
You know, I kind of wish I was a woman in that era instead. I don't want to sit there and discuss politics.
We had it good back then. We got to nap and we couldn't vote.
Well, I guess that's a fair trade-off. Well, you're not allowed to do this very important thing, but go ahead and take a nap. So, of course, the basic premise is, I love this guy, but I'm going to marry this guy, and I'm going to marry this guy despite the fact that I still love this guy. It's,
She's marrying what was his name? She's not married to him for very long.
No. Charles.
Because it's because everyone else was getting married before the war,
she has
right?
no other choice.
Yeah.
She's
Everybody else is
depressed.
getting married before the war.
She needs someone to marry.
Yeah. She's got to get married, and the war's starting tomorrow.
Yeah. The war's starting tomorrow, so you better get married. So she does, and then he dies. And, like, the war had, like, barely even started, too, and he's already gone, so... Because it was pneumonia and measles. Didn't even die in combat. So, of course, what are we going to do? We're going to throw a party. Because what else are we going to do?
We're going to have a fundraiser.
Basically. But she loves...
Ashley.
She loves a guy named Ashley.
Who is a very handsome man. But he belongs to another, her really good friend, who is basically the only person who knows her that actually likes her.
Yeah, pretty much.
She's the only one that actually sticks up for her and becomes a real friend to her.
And of course, you got that highborn mentality where you're going to marry your cousin so we can keep you in the family. Which continues in the South to this very day.
Well, continues everywhere where there's royalty.
Pretty much, yeah. And then, of course, we all know the visitor from Charleston, Clark Gable's character, Rhett Butler, ends up becoming the other star of the show. So the whole thing is basically she ends up with this guy because she doesn't really have
She doesn't want to be an old maid.
Basically, yeah. I really like the slave characters, the working characters. I think they did a really good job with this.
Is great.
Oh yeah. Hattie McDaniel, who actually got an Oscar nomination but couldn't attend because of those restrictions for her people back in the day. Because again, even though we didn't make that much progress between the Revolutionary War and 1939, apparently, but we did get Technicolor for the film, so that's a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we said, there's part 1 and there's part 2, and of course
it ends with Atlanta burning and them escaping, which is like a great ending area. Very nice scene work done there.
The famous words, "I will never go hungry again."
I love when she smacks the shit out of the one girl because she's like, "I know everything about birth and babies," and then she's like, "I don't know nothing." And she's like,
I don't know
you bitch. She beats the shit out of her.
I don't know the head from the foot.
Just smacks her. Like, damn.
Part that's really messed up is that their kid dies the same way her dad died. By just falling off of a horse.
Oh, man.
Part 2, the beginning of part 2 is where I kind of started to don't daze out a little bit. Because it's a lot of just build up for what's going to happen for the end of the movie. But it's also
in the first half I felt sorry for her, but in the second half I was like, you're just being super
nightmare.
manipulative. And she's like, I need money to keep the land, which is good. Which is like, the best way I can do this is screw one of my best friends and marry who she wants to marry instead because he has money.
It was actually her sister that she
her sister, yeah.
It was her sister.
She screwed over her sister because she knew he had enough money to have a new store in Atlanta after the war.
What was the part of the movie that you thought was really funny, Dan? That, like, it was supposed to be a serious scene, but you laughed anyway?
Oh, it's when she's married to Rhett, and they have the big fight at the top of the stairs, and she goes to hit him, and he ducks her, and she falls down the stairs. I laughed so hard.
And ends up miscarrying?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, she's pregnant. It's probably going to be a miscarriage after this. But I was still laughing. I was like, oh, man, this is terrible.
We don't exactly have the lightest senses of humor, but anybody who's listened to our wrestling podcast already knows that, so at least we know that's a good thing. But yeah, like I said, I kind of started to tune out at the beginning of part 2 because I was already watching a movie for 2.5 hours and it was getting a little tedious. But I'm glad I stuck it through because I loved how the movie as a whole comes to an end where Rhett's just like, dude, I am done with you.
It's like crazy because they finally get married and they have a kid, and then both of them just become these manipulative people because they want the kid to have the best thing possible, which is like a good thing, but also they're just being horrible people because of it. And then in the end, everyone they know dies and they split up.
Pretty much.
Pretty much, yeah.
It's back-to-back scenes where somebody dies.
Somebody dies.
It's like, really? Wow.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like one funeral and then the next. It's like 4 weddings and a funeral.
I'm going to have to throw that on the list for future.
I've never actually seen that one.
Neither have I.
Neither have I.
I could throw that in there for a future. By the way, for all of you listeners, we take all requests. Because if we can fit your movie in with 2 other movies and make them battle, we do that. So submit requests. Like I said, this entire episode is based on requests. I was like, what are the 3 most classic movies people suggested? Oh, here they are. So, this is actually the first color film to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. By the way, of the 3 movies we're talking about, the newest film is entirely black and white. And, like, one of the older ones is entirely color.
And then there's one where it's half and half.
It's half and half, yeah. The other one's half and half. So we're actually going to kind of backtrack as we do the color scheme here. But like I said, really good movie. I would just preferred it to be 2 movies. In fact, next time I watch it, I'm gonna do it as part 1 and part 2. Be like, let's watch Gone with the Wind part 1. Literally part 1. I mean, the disc even ends with the movie is so long they have an intermission.
And it's a real, like, 20-minute long
intermission. Actual intermission. The music's actually pretty cool, too. So, good iconic soundtrack and everything.
It's so old it starts with the overture at the beginning.
Well, it was fun, because
of every song.
I've never actually seen this movie, so this was a fun watch for me. I had a good time. That said, let's talk a little bit about The Wizard of Oz. Again, I think I mentioned Gone with the Wind was actually based on a book. Wizard of Oz, of course, also based on a book. It's an actual series this time, not just the one.
Yes. And Wizard of Oz was written by a guy who lived near where I lived in New York.
That's
and
actually pretty cool.
The town has an Oz Fest every year, and it's just, they go crazy. Wizard of Oz.
Ozzy Osbourne
No.
Fest.
It's all Wizard of Oz stuff.
That's kind of creepy.
They go nuts over there.
It is kind of creepy.
And you know, the book is supposedly about how America should get rid of the gold standard when it comes to our currency.
Well,
that's what I was told in college.
Huh.
Not that I believe half of what I heard in college.
So what's cool about The Wizard of Oz? It's all a big setup to what's going to happen on the other side of the rainbow. So like, she's upset because her dog bit some lady down the street, and the lady wants.
Oh yeah, and that's it. It starts with this. This has already happened.
Yeah, your dog bit me, and I want it euthanized, and I'm getting basically a warrant almost to get the dog taken away. And then she meets this traveling fortune teller, And then when she actually arrives in Oz, of course, all the characters she meets are